Well, good morning, everybody. How are you guys? All right. So my goal for the class, what I have envisioned is that here in week 1, we're going to talk about what the law is and how we interact with it. Week 2, we're going to talk about how does Jesus fulfill the law, just because I like context. When I think, do I understand the 10 commandments? I like to reach to the very beginning and be like, well, what was happening at the beginning? Why did it happen? When did it happen? The middle is easier to fill in after that. But you also have to know the end. Like, do I know how it ended? What did the purpose happen? Did what happened, what I thought was going to happen in the end, happen? Like, well, do I understand what this is? I like to reach for what I know and what I don't know. Because I don't think there's anything wrong with not knowing things. That's fine. If you don't know, but the danger is not knowing what you don't know. So I just like to find out. So we're going to look at the beginning and we're going to look at the end. And then we'll go back and look at the middle. At what are these commandments? What are they? So, because I've been told repeatedly by everyone that I have a unique perspective, and I guess that means I just say things funny sometimes. I think that's nice for, she says things weird. Don't be offended if you don't understand it. So if I say something weird and you're like, whoa, just say, whoa, I'm used to it. Everybody does it. It's fine. I understand things through metaphors more than anything else. They work for me, but I think metaphors, you learn from how they do illustrate your point, but you also learn from how they don't illustrate your point. So if you reach the end of one of my metaphors, that's fine. We'll just learn from it. No problem. Okay, here we go. You ready? Question number 1. There's nobody on Zoom, so we don't have to worry about this mic or whatever. But do relationships have laws? They have guidance. And it's all unwritten.
You may know what you consider to be the law of the person.
Yes, I agree with all of that. My answer is yes in only unhappy relationships. Well, I mean, and you guys are in relationships. I think everyone here has a marriage specifically, so we can all use that metaphor without discrimination. You guys, when you're happy with your spouse, is what they want a law to you or a joy to you? Right? It's right. So yes, there are laws in unhappy relationships. All right. So what does the word law mean? What is a law? A boundary. I have my answers are a list of things to do or not do in order to be acceptable to God, a community, or a personal belief system. They are guidelines. They're an inanimate concept to be talked about, decided upon, or punished upon based on violation of. Personally, growing up, I never really had a clear difference between God's laws, my parents' laws, or the community's laws. Rules are rules are rules are rules. Follow them. Right? Maybe. Dictionary.com says that laws are the principles and regulations established in a community by some authority and applicable to its people, whether in the form of legislation or of custom and policies recognized and enforced by the judicial decision, or any written or positive rule or collection of rules prescribed under the authority of the state or nation as by the people in its constitution. The controlling influence of such rules, the condition of society brought about by their observance, blah, 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 blah. Right? Oh, hey, Zoomers. Hey, Mona. Hey, Dina. Okay. So we clearly have, obviously, because I asked if laws are in relationships and what laws are separately, that's the dichotomy we're playing with here. The difference between a rule and a relationship. And so would you agree that maybe the main difference, one of the big differences between the rules and the rules within a relationship are the intimacy to the one or ones who hold you accountable? Because, for instance, the Texas state law, I have no relationship with the people who are going to hold me accountable. I don't know how they feel. I don't know them, but they get to hold me accountable to the Texas state law. We do not have a very close relationship. And the difference therein, if that was my husband who happened to work there, his work and his job and these rules would mean something differently to me. I would relate to them differently, right? I would care a little more. I would be sadder when they got broken, right? Maybe. Okay. All right. Well, what relationship / institution do we humans have that have really high standards in a really close, intimate relationship? Marriage, right? Hopefully you guys all knew that answer because you're all married. Jeremiah 31:32. God is prophesying, I guess, through Jeremiah. He's saying a whole bunch of confusing things. But one of the things he says is in reference to the new covenant that he's going to make one day. He says, it will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors, the ones in the 10 Commandments. That's our class. It won't be like that one. When I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them. So when God describes his relationship to Israel, he doesn't sound like the Texas state body of legislator. He sounds more like my husband. So when he gives us a rule, a boundary, a guideline, is a rule? Or is it something more than that? Is it, yeah, we'll get there. Okay. So I'm going to read Exodus 19 through 20, verse 2. This is some of what we're talking about. Okay. So on the first day of the 3rd month, after the Israelites left Egypt, on that very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. And then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together. When the Lord said, "Will you marry me?" they said, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to the Lord. The Lord said to Moses, "I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you." And then Moses told the Lord what the people had said. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Have them wash their clothes and be ready by the 3rd day, because on that day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, be careful that you do not approach the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain is to be put to death. They are to be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on them. No person or animal shall be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they approach the mountain." That was a lot of prep. Days worth of prep. That's a lot of pomp. He's going to personally come so that they can hear him in the mountain. What do we do? What do we celebrate? What beginning do we spend this much time on? More now in money, right? A wedding. So after Moses had gone down the mountain to the people, he consecrated them and they washed their clothes. And then he said to the people, "Prepare yourselves for the 3rd day, abstain from sexual relations." On the morning of the 3rd day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke, flowers, because the Lord descended on it in fire, a tuxedo. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. The Lord descended to the top of Mount Sinai and called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said to him, "Go down and warn the people so they do not force their way through to see the Lord, and many of them perish. Even the priests who approach the Lord must consecrate themselves, or the Lord will break out against them." Moses said to the Lord, "The people cannot come up to Mount Sinai because you yourself warned us. Put limits around the mountain and set it apart as holy." So the Lord replied, "Go down and bring Aaron up with you. But the priests and the people must not force their way through to come up to the Lord, or he will break out against them." So Moses went down to the people and told them. And God spoke all these words: "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Okay, so we're going to go from there to context. I like context. Whenever like I just said, if I'm trying to figure out if I understand something, I reach to the beginning of it and I reach to the end of it and I feel around in the middle and I see where are my holes of knowledge, of understanding. So I have two versions of my timeline. This is the one I use in my head. I use this all the time for everything. And then I found there's like, God makes lots of promises. You can use those to hop through if you want to use that as your timeline. But I use this. So we're going to talk about mine. So at the very beginning, I have a chunk in my head that groups together. Starting at creation, it goes all the way through Noah. That's a whole bunch of Old Testament mystery that you know what I do know about it? I know that God tells us that he made something. And that it was good. So that happens. God is doing that. Because these things happen kind of to people. These are the people things. But I like to, what is God doing? Because yeah, he's out of time, but he worked in it on purpose for us in an order. So what did he do? He made something. And then in this bit, he also tells us that something went wrong with the thing that he made. And then something happens with Noah. And pretty much I take that he's not giving up on us. Right? He won't give up. So I know this is drastically oversimplifying chapters and chapters of wonder, but that's what we're going to take out of it for now. And then Abraham through Joseph. I call this God is laying the foundation to make a people. And he also calls a couple shots when he does this. He calls the first shot he says that he's going to free the people. He says, hey, you're going to be I'm going to make a people out of you. Also, in a long time from now, your people, they're going to have a hard time. I'll see to it. So don't worry about it. He calls it the freedom shot. And he calls another shot there. He calls the shot that he's going to pay the price for this at his own cost. Because when he goes through, when he makes the covenant with Abraham and he cuts the pieces to say, may I be like these pieces if I don't fulfill, Abraham doesn't walk through the pieces. God's representation does. God promises, when you screw up, may I be like these animals. May I pay the price, right? He calls that shot from the beginning. So he calls freedom and he calls salvation. Okay. And I also say that he's setting up a people so that he can send the Messiah. The reason he's doing this is to send us the Messiah, right? Okay, then this happens. He says, hey, I'm going to do all these wonderful things. It's not going to be easy, though, because apparently he promises him 400 years of slavery. So that happens. Here's the slavery, Egyptian slavery, plagues, Red Sea. And this part specifically, you guys know that period in history where there's some war somewhere and some king wants some land to belong to him. So he like batters it over and over again and they call it the rough wooing. That's kind of how I see this. It's a bit of a rough wooing. In that, I mean, there's going to be some hard times, right? They have some hard times, but God uses this to catch some attention, to prove that he's this, because he called it way back here. So it's building up, right? He made something went wrong. He's going to do something about it. He's calling some specific shots about how that's going to go. Here's some of the problem that he referenced before, and he's going to use his involvement in that to help the Israelites believe in him, to understand who he is and the person with whom they're going to have a relationship, so that when he proposes, they can say yes or no, right? Maybe. I know. I talk about it weird. It's okay. And then we have the 10 Commandments, the deserts, and the promise. And this is the wedding ceremony. This is the wedding ceremony where God he's been working on his people. He's been getting some faithful individuals to kind of teach their families. He's been building up a crowd. They've been through some stuff together at this point, and now they are ready to officially become his people that he's going to use. So I have a question here that's for later. I'll ask it later. And then we have, after that, after they become his people, they go through some stuff, judges, kings, and other cool stuff I should know about. That's what I call this section, because I honestly have the least biblical knowledge about what happens here. No idea, not really. Stuff, stories that we can use to build our own faith out of context and individually. I don't really get the whole movement totally, but I do know that he is laying specific foundations and groundwork upon which he can send the Messiah. Right? He's interacting with peoples and he's building specific foundation on which to send the Messiah, our Savior, so he can fulfill this shot call, right? And then after that, we go to Jesus, and this is him saving our butts. That's in my head. And then after that is Paul and them. And that's when God tells us about the butt saving and what exactly that means, right? So we get to saved, ? Now and then. We learn all that mysterious stuff in that bit of scripture. And these pretty much, as you can see, follow the basic timeline. But I think this way, so I like that one. Okay. And we're talking about this section. This is where we are right here. So how do you think we're supposed to interact with these laws that come with it? Like we do with modern day laws, or like laws in a relationship? So we've talked about what sin is. Do anybody know what's sin? Missing the mark. Exactly. Missing the mark. What is the mark? God. I think I would phrase it, the mark is an intimate, close, obedient, successful relationship with God is the mark, right? And a successful relationship with God obviously has things that it means. Some of those things that it means, God tells us about very thankfully in the 10 Commandments, because how would we know if we didn't know him? If you don't know your spouse, how can you act on purpose to please or displease them? You know, like back in the day with arranged marriages, your father married you to someone, you're going to meet him that day. And, you know, maybe you arrive at his estate before he does because he's out of town. How do you prepare it? Do you put out cut flowers? Do you have the staff come out and say hello? What do? You don't know. You take your shot. And if he's displeased with it and he's nice, he's not going to be mad. He'd be like, well, you didn't know, but I don't like this and that and the other. We don't have that kind of relationship with God, thankfully, because he tells us all about it right here. We have a wedding ceremony. This guy, this commentary by, what's your name? I don't know, by this guy. I'll tell you about it later. Yeah. Pemberton. He says, one way to describe the relationship between Yahweh and Israel is to use the classic tale of the damsel in distress. In Egypt, the young woman cried out for someone to rescue her. Yahweh came and swept her off her feet, flexing his muscles to impress her and beating the gods of Egypt to a pulp. Israel was impressed enough to run away with Yahweh into the wilderness, escaping Pharaoh's slavery and seeing a new possibility for her future. So Israel and Yahweh traveled through the wilderness, dating and getting to know each other as they neared Mount Sinai. Their relationship was rocky, to say the least. More than once, Israel asked herself why she ever left Egypt, while on the other side, all Yahweh wanted was for Israel to trust him, to fall in love with him. But after all those years with Pharaoh and the gods of Egypt, trust did not come easily for Israel. Nonetheless, anyone can see that something special was happening between these two. So I think that's pretty neat. Tim Keller, a minister I like a lot, he talks about covenant relationships. He said, God only relates to people through this type of relationship, a covenant. He said, in our culture, covenants are disappearing and vastly underappreciated, the ones that still exist. That was my addition. But he says, a covenant is a bond which creates a certain type of relationship, one more personal than one based only on a legal contract, and one more binding and everlasting than one based on personal feelings. A stunning blend of law and love, a personal relationship made more intimate and personal because it is legally binding. Each side has made a vow and lost their independence, so therefore you can trust the other will be there. Does God give up his independence to Israel? I don't know, right? It's weird. It's one of those. No, but he does move for them first. He does move first. He does go out on the relationship limb first. He saved them from Egypt. He carried them on eagle's wings to himself. He wooed. He did do that first. So, all right. So they aren't called the 10 Commandments in the Bible. They're called the 10 Sayings. And I posit that they are God's standards in our relationship to him based on what he has to be because of who he is and what he is doing, because he made something, right? There's something going on. And because of who he is and who we're supposed to be, these are the rules. These are relationship standards. I don't think we should look at them. There are two ways to look at them. You can look at them as a perimeter ethic, where we ask the law and they answer us with where the line is that we absolutely do not cross. We say, like, Mom, how far can I go? And she goes, well, you can, stay on this block. So where do you want to go? You want to go to the next block, right? So you get as close to the boundary as you can. Is that how we are to interact with these? Is that how you want your spouse to interact with your standards for your relationship? To get as close to an affair as they can without crossing the line? Or to get as close to just blatant neglect of you as they can without crossing the line? No. And if they wanted to, if to them it was a law, are you already hurt? Yes, I would be. If Chance wanted to get as close to an affair as he could, I'd be broken. I would feel like nothing and I'd be nothing. I wouldn't be special. I'd be an anchor. I'd be a law. And I don't want to be a law to my husband. I want to be a joy to him. And I think that's what God wants from us too. So Danny has a metaphor that I liked that he'd heard about this. It's the dog on the leash metaphor. So is the law, or if you're walking by and there's a dog and you see he's chained up, he's a mean old dog and he comes running at you, but he's on a chain, it's fine. And he's barking and barking and barking. Do you get as close as you can to the dog and like taunt it? No, that's a foolish decision. I don't want to do that in real life. And I don't think that's how we should treat God's laws either. The other way we could treat them is as centering principles on which to center our lives. Where we can ask ourselves, what are the principles behind God's laws? Why does he want us to do this? How are these laws like God, right? How can I please God in doing them? So I already said this. Are your spouse's needs or their love language a law to you? Or are they what you choose so as you could love them? So I guess that's what that's what God invited Israel to, a relationship. Where if they spend their whole time trying to be as close to all the other people's whatever they want as possible, that's already not really what he's asking. Ephesians 31:32, yeah. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant, and it will not be like the old one with the house of Judah, not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant which they broke, although I was a husband to them. There's wedding like prep in here. It's a little weird, like more so than, it's less getting pretty, but the whole Exodus, all the beginning of that is it's wedding ceremony prep. That's super weird. They spent a lot of time on it. Will you share and play that first clip? So we talk about relationships with God all the time. No, you're good. Hit share the screen. The number 2. And then we'll go up here. So we hear a guy all the time talking to us about relationships with God. What do you that we're supposed to have? We need the computer sound or they won't be able to hear.
And with us and within us.
Hello? Hello? Worked just a second ago.
Our God truly walks with us, truly lives among us and with us and within us. Oh, that's what we're called to do, is to do the same with him.
Yeah?
That's what 24 days to Easter is all about.
Yeah? We talk about this all the time. All right. So we are meant to be the bride of Christ now. Therefore, Perhaps they were meant to be the bride of God at the time, through which he could conceive in them the Savior of the universe. What a beautiful relationship. And we now are the bride of Christ. And so we have a lot that we can learn through their relationship with God. But I also say another metaphor other than marriage that I like to understand this is the metaphor of specs. Like a computer program or a machine has operating specs that it has to do. Why? Why do machines have specs? Because we hate them and we want to limit their choices. No, because they're made. Because they're made. Like, that's why it matters. Because somebody chose already. Somebody made it what it was. And for it to now do other things means it's not that. Like, if I made a vacuum cleaner and I needed a vacuum cleaner, and I love my vacuum cleaner, it fills the hole in my life wonderfully by ridding the dust. But my vacuum hates dust. And it decides that that is not what fills it. That it needs to drain the baptistry for me. It will break, right? It will not work. And it would be kindness to explain that to the poor deer before it went and killed itself. That's one of the other ways that I think we're meant to interact with what God teaches us with his standards. I learned going to church camp, I always heard the metaphor, for choosing right and wrong, for sin, for missing the mark. I guess their version of saying missing the mark was it's as if there is, I don't know if this is how they did or I've added to it, but because God made, in my head, I imagine it like there's nothing. There's big black void, right? And God makes something. So here it is. Here's the something he made, a land bridge, let's say. And everything else doesn't exist. There is only what is made. So if we walk in how we were made and the way we were made, we get filled up, we fulfill our purpose. We are what our engines, our machines were supposed to do and supposed to be the whole time. We're happy and wonderful, but we always have the choice to turn this way and walk off the cliff, right? Woo! And that's what I always heard was God does. He will give you up to your choices, right? That's what God says in the event. He will give you up to your choices. So are you walking on something? Are you walking on nothing where when he gives you up to your choices, you will fall? You will be nothing. That's why sin, the wages of sin are death, not because God is mad at you. He doesn't want you to go over there. There's nothing over there. Don't do that. You're going to die. So it's a kindness. So to believe in God, this was a quote from Rabbi Vogel him and Dr. Laura Schlesinger write a book together on the 10 Commandments. And he says, to believe in God is to believe that humans are more than accidents of nature. It means that we are endowed with a purpose by a higher source, and that our goal is to realize that higher purpose. If each of us creates his own meaning, we also create our own morality. I cannot believe this, for if so, what the Nazis did was not immoral because German society had accepted it. Likewise, the subjective morality of every majority culture throughout the world could validate their heinous behavior. It comes down to a very simple matter. Without God, there is no objective meaning to life, because he made one, and if he didn't, then he didn't. Nor is there an objective morality. I do not want to live in a world where right and wrong are subjective, says Rabbi Vogel. And neither do I. That sounds pretty horrible. We're really trying to create that world here in America. We are super trying, but I hope we never succeed. So the first saying is, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And I think that's because, one, you need to know, you need this. You need everything that comes before this. You need to know that he made with purpose and intent. You need to know that something went wrong with it. You need to know that all of the choices we think we have are actually lies. That there is still one path to good. Only one was made, one good. But we need to know that there's a lie. We need to know that there's been a lot of work going into this so far. We need to know what that work was and with who and why. We need to know that God is someone who keeps his promises because he's done it over and over and over again. And we need to know that when he gets down here and sets up our relationship with him, the people's relationship with him. So I know we have Israel and God and kind of like us and Jesus. However, like Danny's been saying all throughout John, and I would posit all throughout the Bible, God uses earthly things to talk about heavenly truths. So next week, when I was doing my research for next week and my thought thinking, and I was like, man, how does God fulfill the law? What is the difference between the old covenant and the new covenant? And I found a website and it had 5 things. And they just confused the mess out of me. And I asked Danny and he was like, no. And then we said, well, and I was like, really? But what if they mean this? And he was like, well, but I don't think so because of this. And just heads explode. Yeah, no, heads exploded and it was crazy. And I was really like, man, what does that mean? How am I supposed to deal with the relationship? And I think this is the wrong question to ask. I don't think we're supposed to ask what's different. Because if you ask Genesis, how did God make the world scientifically? That's the wrong question for that text. It's not what it's answering you. It's not answering you how, it's maybe answering you why and with what intent, but it is not telling you how. It's not a recipe. It's a love song. Difference. And perhaps that the text, is it raining? It's raining, y'all. Let's consider that a blessing. So I think we're not supposed to ask what's different about the old and the new covenant. I think what are we supposed to learn from the old covenant about what's the same, what's similar, what carries forward, what can we learn? So I don't think that helps. I can tell you what the website thought if you want, but it just led to one of those like logic circles that you're like, wait, we must have got off track somehow. What's happening? And I think it was because it was the wrong question. All right. We have time for questions or comments or...
I have heard before the idea that God asked, and I don't think this is in the Bible, but I just think it's kind of an interesting thing to ponder. God asked other groups of people besides the Jewish people if they wanted to be his bride or whatever. And I ran across that once. I think it's just an interesting idea that not everybody said yes, perhaps. So I'd never heard it before. I'm not sure it's for real, but I just thought, wow, okay, that's kind of an interesting idea, maybe.
And they wouldn't have recorded it.
I think an indication of that is the pre-Noahic situation. Those people were intended to be God's people. They'd rejected that.
That's true. I hadn't really thought of that. Yeah. The marriage covenant ceremony between Yahweh and Israel is recorded a few chapters later in Exodus 24 and looks much like our own marriage ceremonies. Well, at least a little bit. Just before the ceremony begins, Moses asks Israel one last time if she is certain that she really wants to go through with the covenant wedding. Without hesitation, Israel responds, yes, everything that the Lord has said we will do. So Moses writes out on the scroll book the covenant, builds an altar, and offers sacrifice. Well, and that's one of the other things that I think is important about knowing that there is something made, that there is a right, that there is a relationship, that we have a way that we thrive, a setting in which, a mode on which we're supposed to operate. And that's one of the reasons I think the Sabbath is such a big deal. Time is a gift. Time was made. And sometimes I think we end up, when we look at the Bible, we get confused and a little bit poo on Jews sometimes because we know they messed it up and we know they sinned a whole bunch. And because in our instant reading, we shrink time and we don't give them what we would want. You know what I mean? Because that same packet says that, some of these verses kind of like premarital counseling for God and Israel. They have to really know what they're getting into. And that thought made me go, hold on. Like I expect them to understand to my level of understanding while it's happening to them. And that is ridiculous because I married just one human and we've been doing it for 6 years now. But those first few years, you learn a whole bunch and you mess up and you don't please them the way you wanted to, or even you piss them off the way you did want to, whatever. And I just think time, I think we need to look at them and remember humans in time. How would you want that to be? You just set up a new relationship with a God that's different than every other God on the entire planet that you barely understand because you think so much like the other people around you. Like it's going to take you some time. It's going to take you time. And we have a God who made time, understands time, and he uses it all the way to the end beautifully. So anyway, it's one of the things I think we can look at some of the commandments slightly differently. The end.